Welcome to the folklore and mythology of the Alder. So, my friends, welcome back. It is autumn equinox, or the fall equinox if you live across the pond. The hinge of the year. Winter is coming. The days are getting shorter. The sun is dipping down behind those trees now. We're moving into the dark, wet half of the year. This is a time of year associated with the alder tree or alder tree, which is this behind me here. Not this guy, that's a willow, but this tall, straight guy behind me is alder, growing along the margins of this pond in a field on the farm here. So the main takeaway with the alder tree is water. This is a water tree in symbolism, in mythology, in folklore, and also in its natural habitat, which is wetlands, marshlands here. I live in a marsh. I'm a bog goblin, and this pond here was actually dug when I was a kid. I used to ride my little 50cc motorbike when I was 8 years old in this field, and this pond wasn't there. Neither were any of these trees. We planted most of these trees, but I'll tell you what we didn't plant, these alder. They sprung up of their own accord, seeds spread by birds or carried in the water, and up they sprung because this is the ideal climate for them. Clay soil, very boggy. So lots of associations with water with the alder tree. Also with fire, interestingly. So this is a tree of two halves. This is a tree of balance, it's often said. If you need to find balance in your life, then come to the alder tree. The reason why it's associated with fire as well as water probably is because the sap turns pinky red when cut. So I've just cut this Ogham stick just now from that alder tree right there, and gradually over the course of making this video this will start to turn pinky red. In fact, it's already started around the margins here now. It was white before, so already starting to turn red. That's one of the reasons why the tree is also associated with fire. There are other reasons, but also water. That's the main thing. So one of the qualities of the alder tree, when it is growing in water with its roots in water, it goes very, very hard. So this is ordinarily a very easy tree to carve. Woodworkers love this tree, and for that reason you can make all sorts of things out of it. Buckets, clogs, tools, little cups, all sorts of things you can make from alder just because it's so smooth, so workable, it doesn't splinter, it doesn't chip. It's gorgeous. But it's quite a soft wood until you put it in water and then it turns rock solid. Really interesting, stable quality of that tree, which is also associated in the symbolism and folklore. So that has led to its use, the alder, as a tree for foundations in boggy ground. There are cathedrals and churches in this part of the world which are in very boggy ground where the foundations are made of alder. The city of Venice is built on alder wood. Really, really old alder wood. Also, bridges and walkways and gangways over water which have a spiritual function. Spitfires flying overhead again. In the history of these islands, we went from building stone circles like Stonehenge and Avebury, this is an oversimplification, but to abandoning those sorts of structures largely, or we stopped making them anyway, and we started focusing on bodies of water as the gateway, the door to the spirit world. And we know that because we found multiple votive offerings in lakes, in marshes, in rivers, and often we have found jetties or causeways going over fens or lakes and rivers that just end in the middle of a body of water. So it's not a bridge all the time. It often just goes out into the water, and there at the end we find swords, we find helmets, we find coins, we find shields, we find pots, we find all sorts of offerings to the dead, to the ancestors, to the spirit world. Those pontoons, those jetties, those bridges are made of alder. This has led to a spiritual association with the alder, with water, but also as a bridge to other worlds, a bridge to the spirit world. So that we find throughout mythology and folklore. So some other things that are made from alder wood are milk buckets. Alder has a very sterilizing property to it, a antifungal property, so it's probably a very good thing to put something you're going to drink in. It has an antibacterial property, more so than a lot of other woods. It's also very easy to carve, as I've already said, and it doesn't split. It gets harder when immersed in water, so a perfect thing for a milk bucket. I mean, I say it doesn't split. This is my alder cup, and it's split. Other things you use or make alderwood out of are clogs in a more recent era, again, because they don't splinter. A sort of travelling thing, and also trudging through wet or boggy ground. They're very good for your wooden clogs. Other things alder has been used to make in the historical period are weapons, principally shields, often made of alder wood. It's very difficult to get an axe out of alder. So you think if you've got an enemy coming towards you and he chops with a sword or axe at your shield and then he can't get it out, his weapon is gone then. You might have also lost your shield, but he's lost his killing weapon, so then he's at a disadvantage. The alder is associated with warrior culture. So used to make shields in the Iron Age in Britain and Ireland, probably elsewhere in Europe as well, used to make shields, defensive tree, protective tree, but also arrow shafts and also spears, once hardened in water. Another thing that alder has been used to build are boats, canoes, ships, the masts of ships, lots of different parts of ships. Again, because it tightens up and hardens in the water. It doesn't rot away like a lot of other things. So in the historical period, alder being used to journey across water. Again, think of the symbolism here, like a bridge, journey into other worlds or inner worlds. So I'm going to carve a little Ogham on this now. You see? It's going white again now, look. So that's the reddening of the alder, which is why the tree is often associated with, or one of the reasons the tree is often associated with warrior culture, red, hot-blooded warriors, also maternal reproduction, menstrual blood, also the other world. Red is often a colour associated with the other world because of blood, but also red ochre. In a lot of Mesolithic burials, the bodies were splattered or painted with red ochre around their eyes and head, and also their reproductive organs. We don't really know why, but something to do with seeing the spirit world has been suggested, or safe passage into the spirit world. So a lot of those associations with things that are red or turn red, as we have with alder. So you see, this has gone completely white again now, and it'll start to turn red in the next minute or so. There we go then. See, this is starting to turn red again. And this is the Ogham symbol, or Ogham symbol, for alder, or in the Old Irish language, Fearn. So this stands for the phonetic value F in Old Irish. In the Ogham alphabet or script or symbolic system, sometimes called the Celtic Tree Alphabet, this symbol represents alder. Fearn means alder. It's pretty definite, and that's also backed up by the kennings, the little scraps of poetry that give us clues as to the, I suppose, if you like, spiritual or symbolic system of meaning behind this. So the poetic kennings for this letter or this symbol are a vanguard of warriors. We already heard about warriors and the historic connection of this tree to warriors. So that's one clue. Also a protection for the heart, and a bucket of milk or a pail of milk or something along those lines. Can't quite remember the direct translations off the top of my head, but we have an association there with warriors, protection, and milk. So typical milk buckets traditionally made out of alder wood, so that connection makes sense. Also the maternal aspects. The warriors, very, very big warrior tree, strong warrior tree, protective tree. So that is Alder in the Ogham. What about wider folklore? Because the Alder appears so much in folklore. So in mythology, the Alder Tree appears very, very famously in a Welsh text called the Battle of the Trees. That's the English translation anyway. This is in the Song of Tasliesin. Tasliesin, the great bard. If you want to know about Tasliesin and how he was born from the womb of the witch Ceridwen and the cauldron, I've told that story on this channel. I'll put a link to it. But Tasliesin was a great sort of shamanic figure in Welsh mythology. And the Battle of the Trees is a sort of amazing poem, amazing poem, of which there are many dodgy translations floating around the internet. If you want the really good translation, it's this one. It's got the Welsh and then a really good English translation. But in this Battle of the Trees, it's a kind of it's written down in the Christian era, but it's an echo of an earlier, almost shamanic kind of chant. That's what it feels like, anyway. Definitely a relic of the pre-Christian Celtic Iron Age worldview, or even earlier. It starts off with "I have been in a multitude of forms. I've been a sword in the hand, a string on the harp, a word in a book." Just all these things, probably suggesting a Celtic belief in reincarnation, in rebirth, in the transmigration of souls. We're pretty sure that the Celts did believe that from other Greek and Roman sources. So that ties in here because the Alder is a tree of life, death, and rebirth at the border between the land and the water. So in the Battle of the Trees, at one point in it, all these trees are animated and rush into battle, and it's wonderful. You know, some of the trees are slow to put on their armor, other trees are good fighters, other trees are bad fighters, but the Alder is mentioned. The Alder is the first into battle, at the vanguard of the warriors, which is exactly echoed in the Irish Ogham Kenning. So the Battle of the Trees is Welsh, the Ogham texts, like the Scholar's Primer, is medieval Irish. These cultures didn't necessarily talk to each other, you know, they're across a sea, so this probably means it's a much older association from a kind of maybe a pan-Celtic worldview. So there, in the Battle of the Trees, the Alder is at the vanguard of the warriors. He's at the forefront. Maybe this, just thinking aloud here, but maybe this relates to the Alder's biological role as a pioneer species. It's one of the first trees to colonize new land, like the birch, like the rowan, but rowan, rocky, high altitudes, birch, you know, cold environments or post-glacial environments, alder, swampy marshland, like here. So different types of terrain, but all pioneer trees. Like I said, these Alder here grew up of their own accord as soon as this lake was dug. As soon as we stopped mowing this field, boom, the Alder sprang up. Vanguard of the warriors. There is one English translation of the Battle of the Trees and the Song of Tasliesin, which is a bit naughty, it's a bit embellished. And this has been, I think this was used by Robert Graves as well in his White Goddess, which is why some people take umbrage with Robert Graves. But it says something along the lines of, Alder is the leader of the vanguard, which is kind of from the medieval Welsh. But it also then says he is the commander of floods and waters, or something like that, kind of suggesting some kind of aqua magic role, which makes sense with the wider mythological context, sure, but it isn't in the Welsh text. So it's a bit naughty, I think, to kind of make shit up like that. Having said that, it's totally fair enough to put your own interpretation on things based on your subjective experience of the world, because that's exactly what has always been done in history. That's what the same Welsh monks did. In the Battle of the Trees, there's quite a lot about Christianity and Jesus. Don't think that would have been in there. That was those monks interpreting afresh an older Celtic Iron Age tradition from the oral culture of these islands, I would say. So interpret stuff how you will. I think that's fair enough. Just don't say it's from an ancient text if it's not. That's silly. Anyway, that's my side rant. The Alder is also said to be a tree of Bran. Bran the Blessed, a mythical king of Britain, and not just Wales, of all of Britain. You know, before King Arthur was Bran the Blessed, and he was a giant. He could not fit in a house. And it is said, this is attributed to Tasliesin, this riddle, although it's not in the Song of Tasliesin, this is later folk custom. It is said of Tasliesin, this riddle: why is the alder purple? Because Bran wore purple. So the Welsh king Bran, the alder was his tree. Bran means raven, by the way, or crow. Also creatures associated with the other world. Think Odin's ravens, think the Morrigan. So underworld associations here. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of Bran. I might do in a few weeks, but it's from the Mabinogion, a Welsh medieval text. The Alder isn't actually mentioned, but just the symbolism matches. Bran, at one point, he's at war with the Irish, and at one point he walks across the sea because he's a giant. Again, this idea of crossing water. His ships follow him, probably made of alder. Also in this story of Bran, there is the Cauldron of Rebirth. Again, similar to the Cauldron of Cerediwen, also from Welsh mythology. This cauldron, cauldron of Awen, of inspiration, tree of inspiration, the Alder as well. So many associations. But this cauldron, it resurrects dead warriors right here. Resurrects dead warrior. You can see this warrior being dunked in it and these warriors emerging out of it. This is from the Gunstrop cauldron, this tattoo I've got on my arm, which is probably depicting scenes from Celtic mythology, probably this scene. So all these dead warriors go into the cauldron and they emerge again, being unable to speak. So again, an association with death and rebirth and what happens in the deep. So I don't think I've talked about this yet. Moving away from Bran for a minute, water in Bronze Age and Iron Age cosmology is a gateway to the other world, a gateway to the other world, whether it's a lake or a sea or a river. That is where you gain access to the spirit world, where you gain access to the ancestors. So it makes total sense symbolically that cauldron, the surface of that cauldron, dead warriors go in, living warriors come out. There's an amazing broch in the islands of Orkney I visited last year. It's called the Broch of Gurnis. It's a round tower. You can just explore it on your own. In the basement of that tower, there's a shallow pool of water, and in it they found offerings, probably because you go down into the underworld to give offerings and communicate with the spirit world, or maybe even submerge yourself in this ritual bath to communicate, to kind of die in a shamanic sense and commune with the spirit world. So yeah, water as the gateway to the other world. That is the real symbolism of the Alder there, and all these other symbolisms just match up with it perfectly. Later on in the Mabinogion, a medieval Welsh text about Bran the Blessed, Bran makes a bridge across a river in Ireland so his army can cross over his body to reach the other side. So there, Bran literally acting in place of an alder bridge there. Symbolism matching up. Also, later in the story, Bran's sister, Branwen, one of the major characters in this tale, she has a son whose name is Gwern, which means alder. Compare the Irish Fearn, different Celtic branches of the Celtic language family, meaning the same thing, alder. So, although alder isn't actually mentioned in the Mabinogion, because of all these associations, we can kind of associate Bran with alder in the mythology. So leaping across the Irish Sea with Bran and his army of Britons to Ireland, the Alder Tree also features very strongly in Irish folklore and mythology. So it is sometimes said that the first man was carved, was made, or sprang out of an alder tree. I'm not sure how old this idea is because it's in the sort of folk oral heritage, but it's interesting. It's interesting. First man carved from alder, easy to carve, stains red like blood, like life force. So we can see why that could be. Compare also Norse mythology, where the ash tree creates the first man, Esk, and the first woman comes from Embla. We don't know what Embla is, but some people suggest the Alder Tree. So there, in two different world mythologies, the ash giving birth to the Alder giving birth to the first man and first woman, respectively, in Irish and Norse cosmology. Just parking that to one side, though, the Alder is also associated in Irish folklore with a sort of goblin, a sort of malevolent or ambivalent entity called the Red Man, the Fearn. Apologies to Irish speakers for my ruthless slaughtering of your beautiful language. The Red Man, kind of like an evil, an evil leprechaun. It's sometimes described as, and sometimes these figures are sort of hairy, like a wild man, wearing red clothes, maybe, or have a red beard, or maybe red fur on them, or wearing a red cap. Another sort of Irish goblin, malevolent entity, and these beings will do things like if you encounter one crossing a river or in the woods, they might steal things or misplace your items. Typical goblin behaviour. Maybe they might steal a baby and put a changeling in its place, or lead travellers astray across the marshes. Things like that. And indeed, in Irish folklore, it's considered unlucky if you see an alder on a journey. Bit unfortunate if you live in a wet area, because there's a lot of them, and it's considered unlucky to cut alders, again because they bleed. So that's sort of folklore about this sort of goblin, this red man that's associated with the alder. There's an older Irish story, very, very old story. This is related to the Fenian cycle of Irish mythology, the exploits of Finn MacCool, leader of the Fianna, again, band of warriors. And in this story, Dermot is the bravest and most beautiful of all the Fianna, very noble, a bit like Sir Gawain in Arthurian mythology. Hello, boy. And in this story, it's called A Dermot and the Daughter of the King Under the Waves. Again, water. Dermot is looking for his lost love that has buggered off, and he goes to an Irish otherworld, the land under wave, beneath the surface, within. And there he meets the king of the land under wave, and his missus is actually the princess of that realm, and she's dying, she's very ill. And Dermot has to go to another magical realm, the Plane of Wonder, to fetch a healing cup that will revive her. First mention of the Holy Grail in human history, this. So Dermot is going over this great river that separates the land under wave from the Plane of Wonder. It's like another world within another world. It's a meta otherworld. And he can't cross this river. It's miles across. And a little figure appears in the middle of the river. It's a little red man, a little russet-coloured man, a little imp, a little goblin, associated with the Alder Tree. And Dermot steps into this little man's palm and he carries him over. So a bridge there across worlds, again in the mythology. And this little red man gives Dermot some very good advice about traversing the other world. So all of this relates there in Old Irish and Old Welsh mythology. Another place in folklore where we see the Alder. This is you probably won't have heard of this one. This is a lovely little folk tale. This one. It's called the Black Dog of the Wild Wood, and this is again a Scottish folk tale from the Western Highlands, so might have Irish influence. Western Highlands and Islands. And without telling the whole story, the hero of the story, it's a fairly classic motif, this. He's being chased by a black dog. Is he depressed? I don't know. And he's being chased through the forest. He keeps coming to cottages of little babas, little witches, little Kedadwins in the forest that give him help. One gives him a magic dog, one gives him a ball of twine that leads the way, and another gives him an alder wand. And this alder wand, when struck on a river, makes a bridge. Again, that bridge symbology, so he can escape. But one time the hero, foolishly, because he's on his way he was showing off to a sexy princess. He was showing off his bridge-making credentials, and then went off, furtively with the princess, and forgot to make the bridge disappear again. And then the black dog followed our hero over the bridge to the royal castle and did bad things there. And the hero had to ritually die and become reborn. All these same themes here. And it's just interesting of an entity, a negative spiritual entity like that black dog that can sometimes follow us and ruin our lives. So the alder, again, in this sense, is a protective tree against bad spirits, as well as a physical warrior protective tree to make a shield. Similar to Rowan, the last tree I did in that respect, protective against dark forces, protector of the heart. So there are some associations of the alder there in myth and folklore, a bridging tree, a bridge between worlds, a tree of voyaging, a tree of balance, a tree of femininity and masculinity in equal measure. And a very, very beautiful tree to have, particularly if you live in marshlands like this. It's so naturalized to this climate. It is a host, it protects so many bird and insect species, much more than a non-native kind of tree. So really lovely tree to have in these wetlands. So case in point here, I'm walking on really boggy ground right here. It's the time of the year where my whole bottom half is waterproofed. So this willow here, I planted that there only a few years ago, very fast growing. I planted this willow here too. These ash trees behind me, can you see them? They were planted when I was a kid. Look how badly they're doing, they're dying. Okay, one of them might have ash dieback, but it's because it's too wet for the ash tree here. Loads of them have died. This one, this alder here, look how well that's doing, growing in really boggy soil. And again, no one planted this. This just arrived. This just arrived here. Look at it. Funny thing with alder, it looks a lot like hazel, doesn't it? If you were to just give the leaf a cursory glance, you would think that is hazel, but it is not. It is alder. These are the cones you get at this time of year. So yeah, so much alder. You see all this? This is all around the tree, all around that pond there. All of this is alder. A little thing about alder, it doesn't burn very well at all. You cannot set fire to alder. It just retains moisture so well. So it's a terrible firewood. In fact, it's considered quite unlucky to burn alder. So thank you, my friends, for watching. Thank you to the alder tree here that is growing over this bar here. Always watching over us. If you do have alder in your local area, these cones, by the way, the catkins in spring are edible, but these cones, if you boil these up in water, they're a really good fungicide. So they're also really good at balancing the pH of soil and things like that. Again, so interesting when the spiritual or mythological or symbolic function of a tree is mirrored by its biological, practical, scientific function, isn't it? A neutralizer, a nitrogen fixer, a pioneer tree in biology and in folklore. So, my friends, that is the mythology of the alder tree. If you want to know more about the autumn equinox, I'll put that video here, or if you want to hear more about the tree Ogham, I'll put that series of videos here. Thank you very much, my friends. Thank you to my Patreons and all of you that watch these videos. I'll see you again soon.